You are about to witness the most spectacular, unscripted political demolition in modern history, a moment where a perfectly calculated presidential rollout was completely vaporized by a single smartphone, an uninvited guest, and an ex-wife's devastating smile. What you are about to hear is arguably the most entertaining, dramatically absolute political destruction witnessed in recent memory. It was a spectacle that unfolded approximately a week ago, centering on Gavin Newsom, the polished politician often referred to by his critics as California's Ken doll. The stage was set within the solemn, wood-paneled walls of a United States Senate hearing room. Newsom had just walked in, radiating confidence, and boldly declared to the microphone that Donald Trump was the single greatest threat to American democracy. What Newsom completely failed to realize, however, was that the former president of the United States was walking into that very room right behind him. Trump arrived armed not with a stack of policy binders, but with a smartphone loaded with photographs and a brand new nickname destined to haunt Newsom for the remainder of his political existence. In the span of the next 45 minutes, a real estate developer from Queens systematically dismantled the most carefully constructed politician in America using nothing more than a screen, a moniker, and a piece of internet-breaking trivia regarding Newsom's own ex-wife. French Laundry Gavin was about to be served, and the metaphorical check presented to him would be astronomically high. To fully grasp the magnitude of this event, one must first understand the visual perfection of Gavin Newsom. As he sat before the committee, his hair was immaculate. It was architecturally perfect, maintained with a precise combination of premium product and deliberate intention, likely styled in front of a mirror at 6:30 inches the morning. Impressively, it remained entirely flawless 3 hours later as he exited the room, a stark contrast to his political standing, which had been systematically reduced to rubble. The architect of this demolition was a man who arrived exactly 20 minutes late, cast one discerning look at the governor's impeccably tailored $5,000 suit, and delivered 6 simple words that would immediately trend globally across social media platforms for an entire week. "Nice suit, Gavin, who paid?" This disruption was entirely off script. Donald J. Trump was not on the official witness list, nor was he invited to this special hearing. His staff had deliberately kept the committee chairman in the dark about his impending arrival. But this was characteristic of Trump. He rarely simply attended events. He arrived at them, typically off schedule, entirely without warning, and carrying the vibrant, kinetic energy of a man who had just won a high-stakes wager that everyone else in the room had lost. To comprehend how America's most focus group-tested leader was eventually reduced to nervously touching his own hair on live, national television, a subconscious gesture so intensely uncharacteristic that 3 separate journalists made specific note of it in their real-time coverage, you must trace the narrative back to Newsom's foundational error. He made the classic miscalculation shared by every political rival who has ever underestimated Donald Trump. He equated Trump's volume with a lack of preparation. The special Senate hearing, ostensibly focused on state governance and federal standards, was actually a carefully orchestrated piece of political theater requested by the Democratic leadership. Its true unwritten purpose was to provide Gavin Newsom with a prestigious national platform. The former governor of California, currently out of office, was maneuvering for a presidential campaign with the disciplined, inevitable aura of a man who had been reciting his inaugural address in the shower since his high school days. He had explicitly requested this opportunity to showcase California as the ultimate, shining model of progressive governance. In reality, the proceeding was designed to be a presidential campaign launch, thinly veiled by the solemn formality of congressional procedure. Newsom certainly looked the part of a candidate. He was draped in a charcoal Brioni suit, retailing for approximately $5,200. It was tailored in San Francisco and fitted to his frame with surgical precision, designed specifically to project an aura of authority, deep competence, and that specific brand of casual, coastal wealth that silently communicates, "I could be relaxing on a yacht at this very moment, but I have nobly chosen a life of public service." His physical presentation was flawless. His skin carried a warm, healthy tan. His teeth were blindingly white. He resembled a prototype manufactured in a political laboratory, and refined by endless focus groups. Behind him sat an entourage that commanded half of the hallway's seating. This group consisted of highly paid campaign operatives, operating under the guise of policy staff, alongside a communications director who already had 3 distinct press releases, primed for distribution at exact 20-minute intervals. Sitting next to them was a dedicated social media rapid response team, their phones preloaded with Instagram stories featuring triumphant aspirational captions such as "California leads," "Washington follows," and "The future looks like this." Taking his designated seat at the witness table, Newsom adjusted his microphone and began his opening remarks. He spoke with the fluid, rhythmic confidence of a man who had been delivering variations of this exact speech to countless audiences, utilizing various expensive hair products, for the better part of 6 years. Newsom delivered a meticulously rehearsed, theatrical crescendo to the Senate chamber, boasting that California's progressive, 5th largest global economy represented America's future. Pivoting with actor-like precision, he fiercely condemned the current president as the greatest threat to democracy since the Civil War, accusing Trump of maliciously destroying businesses and poisoning the environment to punish political rivals. Smoothing his perfectly straight tie, Newsom arrogantly declared that Washington desperately needed lessons from California, basking in the polite Democratic applause, while his rapid response team frantically uploaded the slick pre-planned clips. Everything was executing flawlessly until the heavy wooden doors swung open. 2 elite Secret Service agents sharply secured the entrance, their chilling alertness signaling an unstoppable arrival. Without warning, formal invitation, or a place on the daily schedule, Donald J. Des. Trump marched into the hearing room. High above, C-SPAN cameras captured the committee chairman's face, instantly draining from confusion into grim, helpless resignation. Rather than retreating to the spectator shadows, the billionaire moved with dominant, unhurried swagger directly to the committee dais, forcefully taking a seat at the Republican end and deliberately pulling the microphone close. Trump's piercing eyes scanned the governor's expensive fabric, structural hair, and flawless tie before his booming voice shattered the room. "Nice suit, Gavin. Who paid?" A tense, collective gasp of anticipated horror washed over the 300 attendees. Projecting heavy, casual authority, Trump mercilessly analyzed the garment, mocking the Brioni 56 suit that cost more than most Californians' rent. As he surveyed the paralyzed chamber, Trump's face settled into a terrifying, familiar smile, the undeniable harbinger of a brutal new nickname. Locking eyes with his prey, Trump softly noted that while his staff advised against unpresidential monikers, looking at Newsom's perfect hair, expensive suit, and hypocritical $350 lobbyist dinners during state lockdowns left him with exactly one devastating thought. Trump paused. It was a masterclass in timing. It was the pregnant pause of a seasoned stand-up comedian, blended seamlessly with the calculated silence of a ruthless real estate closer. It was a silence that explicitly communicated to the entire chamber, "What comes out of my mouth next will follow this man to his grave." French Laundry Gavin. He let the syllables land heavily in the dead air. He allowed the room a moment to process the devastating accuracy of the label. He waited long enough for the high-definition cameras to capture the microscopic tightening of Newsom's jawline, exactly 1 millimeter of visible suppressed fury. "And if that bothers you, Governor," Trump continued, his tone hardening slightly, "you shouldn't have gone to dinner while people were dying, at a restaurant where the appetizer costs more than a COVID test. But we'll get to that, too. We'll get to all of it." With a dramatic flourish, Trump opened his suit jacket and extracted his smartphone. This was the legendary device. It was the very same piece of technology he famously used to fire off missives on Truth Social at 30 inches the morning, the same glass screen that had transmitted messages capable of swinging global financial markets and instigating international diplomatic incidents. He placed it deliberately onto the wooden desk. "Because I brought pictures, Gavin. Lots of pictures." Trump leaned in, "and a picture, as they say, is worth 1,000 words. And the pictures I have of your state are worth about $20 billion in homeless spending that didn't work." He tapped the illuminated screen. Let's start with the beautiful state you destroyed. It was a striking display of political raw talent. Trump utilized no paper notes, no manila folders, no legal pads filled with bullet points, and absolutely no prepared remarks drafted by speechwriters. He relied entirely on a phone, a digital screen, and his unique, terrifying gift. It was the singular ability that had propelled him from the brutal battlegrounds of Queen's real estate all the way to the Oval Office, the power to paint an auditory picture so intensely vivid that the audience could see it in their minds, right before he showed them the actual photograph, which inevitably proved to be much, much worse. California, Trump said softly. He pronounced the word with a nostalgic reverence, the way one speaks the name of a deeply cherished, lost love. I love California. I've built in California. Beautiful buildings, tremendous properties, the most beautiful state in America. He listed its treasures, the expansive beaches, the majestic mountains, the rolling hills of Napa Valley, the glamour of Hollywood, the serene wine country. You had everything, Gavin. Trump held the phone aloft, successfully connecting it to the hearing room's large display monitors. The massive screens suddenly flared to life, projecting a stark, high-resolution photograph. It was a devastatingly wide-angle shot of a street in San Francisco. The image was a chaotic collage of despair, makeshift tents, blue tarps, abandoned shopping carts, and, tragically, human beings lying motionless on the concrete sidewalks in broad daylight. They were surrounded by the tragic, accumulated debris of thoroughly collapsed lives. This is San Francisco, Trump declared, his voice ringing with accusation. Your city, where you were mayor, he pointed at the screen. And I want everyone watching at home to understand. This is not a photograph from a war zone. This is not a developing country. He threw Newsom's earlier boast directly back at him. This is the fifth largest economy in the world, and it looks like a third world disaster area. With a swift motion of his finger, Trump swiped the screen. Next photo. The display shifted to a horrifying close-up. Discarded hypodermic needles scattered across a public sidewalk. In the immediate, softly blurred background, the colorful structures of a children's playground were clearly visible. That's your sidewalk, Gavin, Trump noted grimly. Needles next to a playground, where people pay $4,000 a month in rent to live next to this. He swiped a third time. The screen split into a jarring before and after comparison of the iconic Venice beach. On the left, a pristine, sun-drenched stretch of golden sand and clear boardwalk. On the right, an endless, sprawling encampment of tents stretching out toward the distant horizon. Venice Beach. Before you were governor, and after, Trump explained, same beach, same ocean, different governor. He let the visual sink in, and suddenly, it looks like a refugee camp. He turned his full attention back to Newsom. You spent $20 billion on homelessness, Gavin. 20 billion, with a B, and the number went up. Trump shook his head in feigned theatrical disbelief. Do you understand how hard that is to do? You would have to actively work at making homelessness worse. To spend 20 billion and have more homeless people than when you started, that takes a special kind of incompetence. A special kind. He placed the phone face down on the desk. And people are leaving. They're not just unhappy, they're packing. Trump began listing the corporate casualties. Tesla left. Elon took the whole company to Texas. Oracle left. Hewlett-Packard left. Joe Rogan left. He emphasized the last point to illustrate cultural abandonment. And Joe Rogan can do his podcast from anywhere. And he picked Austin over LA. When Joe Rogan would rather live in Texas than California, you have a problem. Trump leaned back, referencing a widely recognized socioeconomic trend. They even have a term for it. The California Exodus. He pointed a finger at the cameras. That's not me saying it. That's them. The people who lived there, who built businesses there, who loved California, they're running. And they're running from you. As if on cue, the reality of Trump's words materialized in the gallery. A man in his mid-40s stood up. He was dressed practically in a polo shirt, bearing a corporate logo. He possessed the deeply sunburned forearms characteristic of a life spent laboring outdoors, paired with the bone-deep, exhausted facial expression of a man who had recently survived the logistical nightmare of a cross-country relocation. "My name is Mike Driscoll," the man announced, his voice projecting across the room. "I ran a construction company in Riverside County for 16 years, 23 employees." He described his life's work, building affordable, starter homes designed for young families just beginning their lives. Driscoll paused, gathering his emotions. "I moved the entire company to Boise, Idaho, in 2023. Not because I wanted to leave California. I was born there. My kids were born there." The pain in Driscoll's voice was palpable as he detailed the crushing administrative burden. "But the regulations, the permitting costs, the taxes. I couldn't build a house in California for less than $600,000. He contrasted this with his new reality. "In Idaho, I can build the same house for $300. My employees make the same salary, but their rent is half." Driscoll turned his gaze directly downward toward Governor Newsom. "My guys, the carpenters, the framers, the electricians, they thanked me for moving. They thanked me for taking them out of your state." Driscoll delivered the final devastating blow. "When your own workers thank their boss for leaving, Governor, that tells you everything." Driscoll took his seat. Trump immediately pointed at the man in the gallery. "That guy right there. That guy. He built houses for 16 years. Real houses for real families." Trump's voice rose with genuine builder's indignation. "And he had to leave your state to keep doing it. He couldn't build affordable housing in California because your regulations made it impossible. And then you go on CNN and say, 'We need more affordable housing.'" Trump scoffed. "You're the reason there isn't any." Trump tapped his own chest. "I built buildings in California, beautiful buildings. Real buildings, not campaign promises. Buildings." He narrowed his eyes at the governor. "And if I was still building there, I'd move them too. I'd put them on trucks and drive them to Nevada. That's how bad your state has become under your leadership." Without missing a beat, Trump retrieved his phone. The screens updated to display two images, placed side by side in brutal juxtaposition. On the left side of the screen was an official Instagram post from Gavin Newsom, dated on a Monday in November of 2020. The image showed the governor wearing a face mask, his expression grave and serious, accompanied by the caption, "Stay home, save lives. We're all in this together." On the right side of the screen was the infamous, scandalous photograph taken at the French Laundry restaurant, captured during that exact same week. In this image, Newsom was entirely maskless, head thrown back in laughter, closely surrounded by a table full of lobbyists enjoying a lavish $350 a plate dinner, their expensive wine glasses raised in celebration. Monday, Trump narrated, gesturing toward the masked photo on the left, "Stay home, save lives. Very serious, tremendous mask. Great performance." He then pointed sharply to the photo on the right. Friday, same week, $350 a plate. Lobbyists on both sides, no mask. Laughing like it's New Year's Eve. Trump looked out over the stunned committee members. "Same week, Gavin. You posted the stay home message, and the French Laundry photos happened in the same week. Monday, you're telling 40 million people to cancel Thanksgiving. Friday, you're eating appetizers that cost more than most people's grocery bill for a month." Newsom finally broke his silence, leaning aggressively toward his microphone. He attempted to deploy the deeply polished, authoritative voice of a politician entirely accustomed to maintaining absolute control over legislative hearings, rather than merely trying to survive them. "Mr. President, California has a $3.6 trillion economy," Newsom retorted, citing massive statistics. "We create more jobs than any other state. We lead in technology, biotech, entertainment, renewable energy." He gestured dismissively toward the monitors. "You're showing photographs of one neighborhood and pretending they represent 40 million people. That's not governance. That's a slideshow." Trump did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. "One neighborhood? One Gavin? I've got pictures of every neighborhood. Want me to keep going?" Trump rattled off a list of notoriously troubled areas. "I've got the Tenderloin, I've got Skid Row, I've got Venice Beach before you, and Venice Beach after." He mocked Newsom's leadership with the cadence of an infomercial pitchman. It's like a before and after ad for a product that makes everything worse. Try new Newsom, guaranteed to make your city unrecognizable. Trump then dismantled Newsom's economic defense. And yeah, California has a big economy, despite you, not because of you. He laid out the historical reality. California has an economy because of the weather, and because brilliant people built things there before you started ruining it. Trump pointed an accusatory finger. You didn't build Silicon Valley, Gavin. You didn't build Hollywood. Steve Jobs built Silicon Valley. Walt Disney built Hollywood. You inherited them, and you're driving them out. At this point, anyone watching recognized that French Laundry Gavin was in perilous waters. However, the disclosures Trump was preparing to unleash next would make the graphic photographs of homelessness seem like a mere opening act. The subject was about to pivot intensely toward the agonizing details of the French Laundry dinner, the crushing realities of the COVID lockdowns, and the staggering, unimaginable sum of $33 billion in unemployment fraud that had simply vanished into thin air under Newsom's watch. November 6, 2020, Trump announced his vocal register dropping, shifting gears. While the entertainer and showman remained visible, a much sharper, more lethal persona emerged from beneath the surface. It was the relentless cadence of a prosecuting attorney moving in for the kill. Peak COVID, Trump emphasized. The absolute peak. Hospitals full, people dying, businesses closed, schools shut. Trump locked his gaze onto his target. And you, Gavin, Governor Gavin Newsom of California, you're on television every day, telling 40 million people, stay home, don't gather, don't see your family for Thanksgiving, wear a mask, follow the science. Trump held up a single, mocking finger, very serious, very dramatic, very convincing. The hair didn't even move during the press conferences. That's commitment. The room braced for the impact. And that same night, the same night you're telling grandmothers they can't see their grandchildren, you're at the French Laundry, Napa Valley. Trump painted the scene with agonizing detail. $350 a plate, with lobbyists, no mask, 12 people at the table. He leaned closer to the microphone. And here's the best part. The best part. The sliding glass doors were closed, not outside like you told the press, inside. We have the photos. Fox 11 obtained them. The whole world has seen them. Once again, Trump weaponized the room's technology, projecting the French Laundry image at full screen. There was the governor, perfectly framed in the center, laughing uproariously with a wine glass hoisted high, surrounded by wealthy elites in expensive suits, blatantly defying every single stringent health mandate that their own governor had aggressively forced upon 39 million ordinary Californians. Look at that face, Trump commanded the room, pointing at the glowing screen. Look at that face. He is having the time of his life. The time of his life. $350 a plate. Trump highlighted the profound hypocrisy of the guest list. The CEO of the California Medical Association, the guy running the organization telling everyone else to wear masks, sitting right next to him. Also no mask. Trump's voice dripped with disgust. They're laughing. Gavin, you're all laughing. And 3 miles away, a restaurant owner is telling her staff she can't pay them anymore. Trump let the damning photograph linger on the massive screen, a digital monument to political elitism. Meanwhile, your kids, your own children, were going to private school in person while public schools were closed, Trump noted, twisting the knife of parental frustration. Your lockdown, your rules, and your kids were exempt. Because in Gavin Newsom's California, the rules apply to everyone except the governor, and the governor's kids, and the governor's lobbyist friends at the French Laundry. Trump summarized the philosophy with a classic adage. Rules for thee, but not for me. That's not leadership, that's monarchy. And the French Laundry is your Versailles. Suddenly, a second figure rose from the spectator gallery. She was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a modest, simple blouse, her hands tightly clasped together in front of her. She began to speak rapidly, preempting any attempt by the chairman to restore order. Her voice possessed a heartbreaking steadiness, the distinct, fragile control of a woman who had meticulously rehearsed her statement over and over because she knew, with absolute certainty, she would break down and cry if she hadn't. "My name is Rosa Callahan," the woman announced. "I owned a restaurant in Yountville, 3 miles from the French Laundry. Same county, same lockdown rules." She began to list the catastrophic toll of the policies. "I closed for 7 months. I lost my savings. I lost my marriage. My husband left because the stress was too much. I laid off 11 employees, people I'd worked with for 15 years. Rosa Callahan paused, her voice trembling slightly. The governor was 3 miles away, eating $350 appetizers, with the lobbyists who helped write the lockdown rules that closed my restaurant. She repeated the proximity, emphasizing the agonizing disparity. 3 miles. That's how far apart our lives were. 3 miles and $350. She sat back down. The vast hearing room was plunged into absolute deafening silence. Even Trump, a man notoriously uncomfortable with dead air, did not immediately rush to fill the void. He allowed the raw, unfiltered agony of Rosa Callahan's testimony to resonate and do the devastating work it needed to do within the chamber. When Trump finally broke the silence, he pivoted to an administrative catastrophe of staggering proportions. Then, $33 billion, he let the massive number echo. That's the other number nobody talks about. Your Employment Development Department, worst name for a department that loses money, by the way, sent out $33 billion in unemployment payments to fraudsters, to people who didn't exist, to prisoners, to people using dead people's social security numbers. Trump leaned over the desk, his hands spread wide in disbelief. $33 billion. You know how much that is? It's more than the GDP of half the countries in the United Nations, and you just lost it like car keys. Except car keys are worth $20, not $33 billion. Trump leaned even closer, locking eyes with Newsom. But here's my question, Gavin. Where were you when $33 billion disappeared? Were you in Sacramento? Were you in your office? Were you on the phone with the EDD trying to fix it? He delivered the rhetorical death blow. Or were you at the French Laundry? Trump let the brutal question hang suspended in the tense air. He didn't require an answer. In that room, the question itself was the undeniable answer. Then, a subtle but dangerous shift occurred in Trump's physical demeanor. He adjusted his posture in his chair, becoming significantly more deliberate. While the entertainer's facade remained, the underlying comedy evaporated entirely, replaced by a ruthless instinct that his political adversaries chronically failed to anticipate. Trump possessed a primal, unfailing instinct for the jugular vein. "Now, I'm going to talk about something personal, Gavin," Trump warned, his voice low and dangerous. "And I want you to know I'm not a perfect person. I've been in the tabloids. I've had my share of, let's call them situations. The media has covered my personal life more than they've covered most wars." He raised a hand in a gesture of faux surrender. "So, I'm not going to preach. I don't preach. But there's one thing I care about more than almost anything else," Trump declared, establishing his moral high ground. "And everybody who works for me, everybody who has ever worked for me, knows what it is. Loyalty." He outlined his philosophy on betrayal. "You can disagree with me. You can argue with me. You can tell me I'm wrong. And sometimes I am wrong, although not as often as people think. But if I trust you, and you betray that trust, that's the one thing I don't forgive." Trump then resurrected a name from Newsom's political past that struck like a physical blow. Alex Tork. He painted the portrait of a devoted ally. Your best friend. Your campaign manager. The guy who ran your campaigns. Not the guy who showed up at the fundraisers. The guy who built them, who knocked on doors, who raised money, who defended you to every person who said you were too slick, too ambitious, too San Francisco to be trusted. Trump stared directly into Newsom's eyes. "Alex Turk did that for you because he was your friend, and you slept with his wife." The entire Senate hearing room went completely, terrifyingly still. "Ruby Rippy talk," Trump continued, twisting the metaphorical blade. "Your appointment secretary, an employee in your office. your best friend's wife. And while Alex was out there building your political career, while he was spending his evenings and weekends working to make you mayor, you were having an affair with the woman he came home to. Trump methodically recounted the fallout of the betrayal. He found out. He confronted you. He resigned. He walked out of your life. And he took with him the one thing you can never get back. The trust of someone who believed in you. Trump's tone turned fiercely mocking as he described Newsom's response to the scandal. And what did you do? You held a press conference and said you were deeply sorry. Very smooth, very polished, great hair that day too, by the way. Then you blamed alcohol. You said you'd go to rehab. Trump leaned forward, delivering the devastating punchline to the sordid tale. And then, and this is the part that kills me, you didn't go to rehab. You told the Sacramento Bee. 6 years later, there was no treatment. I just stopped. Trump shook his head in disgust. No rehab, no program, no accountability. You just stopped. He glanced toward the committee members. And then you ran for governor and won because in California, I guess betraying your best friend is a resume builder. Maybe they should add it to LinkedIn skills, policy development, public speaking, sleeping with campaign manager's wife. Driven past his breaking point, Newsom finally fired back. For the very first time in the lengthy hearing, he completely abandoned the slick, teleprompter perfect polish that defined him. His voice was suddenly raw, ragged, and desperate, the distinct, aggressive sound of a man who had been deeply cut and was actively bleeding out on the Senate floor. Mr. President, you want to talk about character? Newsom shouted, launching his counteroffensive. Let's talk about your character. 6 bankruptcies, a fake university that paid $25 million in fraud settlements, a charity, the Trump Foundation, shut down by the state of New York for self-dealing, and you were convicted of 34 felonies. Newsom hammered his final point, seeking a lethal blow. You want to compare records, Mr. President? Because my state has a budget surplus. Your businesses have a bankruptcy lawyer. The Democratic side of the gallery erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. Newsom's political team immediately leapt to their feet. His communications director was frantically filming the exchange, both hands shaking with adrenaline. This was the exact clip they needed. This was the triumphant moment Gavin Newsom finally punched back against Donald Trump on live television, seemingly landing a devastating combination. The 6 bankruptcies were undeniable historical facts. Trump University was a documented reality, the foundation's closure was public record, and the convictions were real. For precisely 20 seconds of genuine, highly dangerous momentum, the entire hearing room belonged entirely to Gavin Newsom. And Trump simply waited. He sat there, calmly absorbing the roaring applause and the standing ovation. He waited with the serene, unshakable patience of a man who had stared down massive bankruptcies and clawed his way back, a man who had been entirely written off by society and returned, a man who had suffered the ultimate electoral defeat and staged an unprecedented comeback. Trump fundamentally understood a core truth that a man like Gavin Newsom would never comprehend. Getting knocked down to the canvas is vastly different from being completely knocked out of the fight. When the noise finally subsided, Trump spoke into the microphone. 6 bankruptcies. He acknowledged evenly. You're right. 6. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. And I came back every time. Every single time. That's what builders do, Gavin. We fail. We lose money. We get knocked down by the banks and the markets and the lawyers. And we get up. We build again. We make it bigger the second time. Trump then weaponized the concept of failure against the governor. You know what you did when California failed? When the homeless numbers went up? When the businesses left? When 33 billion disappeared from the EDD? You went to the French Laundry. Trump thumped his chest. I went back to work. That's the difference between us. When things go wrong, I build. When things go wrong, you eat. He pointed directly at Newsom to address the legal attacks. And the Trump Foundation? You're right, it was shut down. I paid the penalty. I moved on. I didn't blame alcohol. I didn't say I just stopped. I said I'll do better. And then I became president. Twice. He brought the argument back to personal accountability. You blamed alcohol for sleeping with your best friend's wife, and then told the press 6 years later that you never actually went to rehab. That's not accountability, Gavin. That's a press release with hair gel. Trump paused, and the infamous, terrifying smile slowly returned to his face. It was the expression signaling that an incoming, highly unconventional munition was about to be dropped. It wasn't a standard policy attack or an evidence-based critique. It was the specific, horrifying type of psychological warfare that only Donald Trump possessed the sheer audacity to deploy in a Senate chamber. But speaking of ex-wives, Trump announced, his voice practically purring with mischievous delight. And this is my favorite part, folks. This is the part I've been saving. Trump gleefully rubbed his hands together. The physical anticipation radiating throughout the massive room was intense, creating an almost suffocating tightening of the atmosphere. 300 people collectively leaned forward, sensing an impending shockwave in the same primal way. Animals instinctively detect a severe drop in atmospheric pressure right before a massive storm makes landfall. Your first wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle, Trump began, painting her picture. Beautiful woman, very smart, tremendous energy, great on TV. He pointed an accusing finger at Newsom. She was married to you. He then dramatically reversed the gesture, pointing his thumb squarely at his own chest. Then she left, and she came to work for me. The massive hearing room emitted a bizarre, choked noise that hovered uncomfortably somewhere between a startled gasp and nervous laughter. It was the distinct auditory reaction of a massive crowd witnessing something incredibly taboo being dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving light of a public forum. Trump pressed his advantage relentlessly. She joined my team. She became one of my best people. She went from being married to the governor of California to working for the President of the United States. He paused for dramatic effect. And when I asked her, and I did ask her, because I'm a curious person, very curious, Kimberly, what was it like being married to Gavin? Trump unleashed a maximum agonizing pause. Every single high-definition camera in the room violently zoomed and refocused onto Trump's face. Every highly sensitive microphone was angled toward his mouth, capturing the absolute silence of 300 people simultaneously holding their breath. You know what she said? Trump asked the silent room. She just smiled. He repeated the devastation. That's it. Didn't say a word. Just smiled. Trump allowed the vivid description of Kimberly Guilfoyle's silent, mocking smile to hang heavily in the stale air of the chamber. And, honestly, Trump concluded, driving the stake through the heart of Newsom's political ego, that smile told me everything I needed to know about your leadership, your character, and your state. Even your ex-wife chose Trump over Newsom, Gavin, and she had personal experience with both options. Trump held up his hands, feigning innocent detachment. I'm not reading too much into it, but a lot of people are reading into it. A lot of people. Many, many people. Across the desk, Gavin Newsom physically reacted. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. He closed it again. For the very first time throughout the brutal hearing, and quite possibly for the first time in years of carefully managed political life, Gavin Newsom did not possess a prepared counter-argument. The ultimate, slick, teleprompter-reliant politician, a man who possessed a rehearsed phrase for every conceivable scenario, was entirely devoid of words. He briefly started to speak, abruptly stopped, attempted to restart his sentence, and then failed again. And in that agonizing vacuum of silence, Newsom did something that absolutely no one in his inner circle had ever witnessed him do under pressure. Slowly, deliberately, he reached his hand upward and nervously touched his own hair. It was an incredibly small, seemingly insignificant gesture. It was entirely unconscious and deeply involuntary. It was the reflexive, desperate motion of a drowning man, reaching blindly for the one superficial thing in his life that had never once failed him. Yet, the symbolism was catastrophic. 3 separate veteran reporters, seated in the press section, independently noted the exact timestamp of the gesture in their coverage. One prominent journalist eloquently described it as the precise moment Newsom's impenetrable political armor finally cracked under pressure. Another analyst likened the small motion to the political equivalent of a massive, devastating structural failure. A third reporter kept it simple and brutal, typing only, "He touched his hair." Within the complex taxonomy of Gavin Newsom's deeply guarded body language, that single gesture served as an unconditional, humiliating white flag of surrender. Sensing the kill, Trump stood up from his chair. He slowly buttoned his suit jacket, a garment that was undeniably slightly too long in the tie and slightly too wide in the padded shoulders. It was clearly the suit of a man who had absolutely never, at any point in his life, looked as though he was manufactured by a political focus group, primarily because he wasn't. Trump was forged by the brutal concrete of Queens and the unforgiving, cutthroat New York real estate market of the 1970s, an arena that fundamentally did not reward superficial polish, mercilessly punished any display of weakness, and absolutely did not care about the perfection of one's hair. "You know what I call you, French laundry?" Trump asked, looking down at the defeated governor. "Not just the nickname, I mean what you actually are." Trump studied Newsom not with raw contempt, a feeling Trump generally reserved only for people he found genuinely boring, but rather with a clinical diagnostic intensity. It was the precise, calculating look of a master builder aggressively examining a gleaming new structure and instantly identifying the fatal hidden flaw deep within its foundation. "You're a beautiful disaster," Trump declared. "Everything about you looks great. The hair perfect, the suit perfect, the smile perfect, the words smooth, polished, teleprompter perfect. You look like a governor. You look like a president. You might be the best-looking politician in America." Trump nodded slightly. "And I say that as for someone who knows a thing or two about looking good." Trump then ripped away the facade. But underneath, nothing. Under the hair, no ideas. Under the suit, no backbone. Under the smile, no honesty. Under the words, no results. Trump fired off a volley of devastating metaphors. "You're a model home with no plumbing. You're a beautiful building with no foundation. You look like $1 million, and you cost the taxpayers $20 billion in homeless spending alone." He picked up his smartphone one final time. "Let me add it up, because I'm a numbers guy. I build things for a living. I know what things cost, and I know what things are worth." Trump stared down his opponent. "And your record, French laundry, is a masterclass in spending a lot and getting absolutely nothing." Trump began ruthlessly counting the failures on his fingers. $20 billion on homelessness. Homelessness went up. That's like hiring a personal trainer and getting fatter. He scoffed at the astronomical waste. $20 billion, Gavin. You could have bought houses for every homeless person in California for less than that. Just bought them, handed them keys. "Here you go, enjoy." It would have been cheaper than whatever you did, which, as far as I can tell, was hold press conferences about homelessness while the tents multiplied behind you. He moved to the next finger. $33 billion in unemployment fraud. Gone. Vanished. Can't find it. Nobody knows where it went. He highlighted the absurdity of the loss. "If I lost $33 billion in my business, I'd be in prison. You lost it in government, and you got a second term." That tells you everything about the difference between the private sector and politics. Trump stopped counting and dramatically held up both hands in a gesture of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. "High-speed rail." He shook his head. "This one is my favorite. This is the one that keeps me up at night. Not because it's the worst, but because it's the most amazing." He outlined the grand failed promise. "You started building a high-speed rail system in California. Voters approved it in 2008. It was supposed to connect San Francisco to Los Angeles. Fast train. Very exciting. The future of transportation." Trump stated the grim reality. It is now 2026, 18 years later. They have spent over $100 billion. Trump leaned in close, his voice a harsh whisper. "And you know how many passengers have ridden the California high-speed rail?" He aggressively formed a zero with his right thumb and index finger, holding it up for the cameras. "Zero. Not one. Not a single human being has ever sat in a seat on the California high-speed rail and gone anywhere." Trump mercilessly dismantled California's infrastructural failures, targeting the state's disastrous high-speed rail project. He mocked the $100 billion initiative as a useless pile of concrete in the Central Valley that, after 18 years, carried 0 passengers and hosted only tumbleweeds. Contrasting this epic waste with his own tangible success, Trump reminded the stunned room that he built a 6-8-story Manhattan skyscraper in just 3 years, complete with actual tenants. The onslaught then pivoted to the economy, where Trump shredded Newsom's contradictory environmental mandates. He pointed out the sheer absurdity of forcing Californians to pay a crippling $6 to $7 a gallon for gas, only to mandate a total ban on gas vehicles by 2035. It was, he sneered, exactly like a restaurant poisoning your meal and then loudly announcing the kitchen was closing. The devastation continued as Trump highlighted the massive corporate and demographic exodus bleeding the Golden State dry. He rattled off the titans of industry that had fled for Texas and Tennessee: Tesla, Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, Charles Schwab, and Palantir. When Elon Musk abandons your state because it is entirely too dysfunctional to operate in, Trump noted, no amount of expensive hair gel can fix the problem. This corporate flight was mirrored by a staggering 300,000 everyday citizens who packed their trucks and drove east over 4 years, desperately voting with their feet to escape Newsom's disastrous leadership. Trump then viciously weaponized the governor's arrogant opening statement, asking how a state that effectively turns a beautiful paradise into an unlivable parking lot could ever be considered a national model. Slamming his phone onto the desk, Trump issued a brutal, unanswerable challenge. Name one physical thing Gavin Newsom had ever actually built. After letting the agonizing silence stretch for 5-10 seconds, Trump answered the question, for him nothing. He reduced Newsom's entire political career to empty press conferences, smooth rhetoric, and immovable hair, all resulting in absolutely zero real-world progress. Then, the booming showman's voice dropped to a grave, chilling register as he addressed a deadly tragedy no one else dared to touch: the wildfires. Trump exposed the terrifying truth that Newsom had aggressively overstated his wildfire prevention efforts by a staggering 690%. As homes burned to the ground, a traumatized firefighter from the devastating campfire in Paradise had revealed the grim reality to Trump. The perfectly coiffed governor delivered his beautiful words for the cameras and promptly drove back to Sacramento, leaving the real heroes behind in the rubble to dig through the ashes for bodies. Beautiful words, no results. That is your entire career in one sentence, Trump declared. He buttoned his jacket once more, a physical reset signaling to the room that his devastating closing argument had finally arrived. French Laundry Gavin, Trump summarized, the beautiful disaster, the man who had everything, the most beautiful state, the biggest economy, the best weather, the most talented people in the world, and turned it all into something that people are literally fleeing from. Trump delivered his final, lethal assessment. You want to be president of this country, Gavin? You can't run a laundry. And I don't mean the French kind. In a desperate, flailing attempt to salvage his dignity, Gavin Newsom made one last attempt to speak. However, his voice had fundamentally altered. The richly polished, heavily modulated baritone that had successfully served him throughout 20 years of public life had completely vanished, replaced by a painfully thin, highly strained frequency. He sounded like a complex machine completely running out of fuel. The people of California re-elected me by a historic margin, Newsom weakly protested. The people of California are leaving by a historic margin, Trump instantly shot back, sealing the coffin, 300,000 a year. They're voting with their feet, Gavin, and their feet are pointed at Texas. Sitting behind the desk, Newsom's expensive suit jacket had developed a noticeable crease at the left shoulder. It was a microscopic wrinkle that would have gone entirely unnoticed on any ordinary human being. But on Gavin Newsom, a man whose entire political and public identity was rigidly constructed on the absolute absence of wrinkles, that tiny crease resembled a massive, spreading crack in a critical load-bearing wall. Chaos silently erupted among Newsom's staff. His communications director had abruptly stopped filming the exchange 6 minutes earlier. The rapid response social media team was currently in a panic, frantically deleting all the preloaded Instagram stories. Every triumphant graphic, every boastful caption reading "California leads" and "the future looks like this" was being hurriedly scrubbed from the internet. What was meticulously planned as a glorious political coronation had rapidly and brutally devolved into a messy public autopsy. The committee chairman, a man who had completely surrendered control of his own proceeding approximately 90 minutes prior, and had quietly made his peace with that humiliating reality, gave a weak, defeated tap of his gavel. "The committee will take the matters discussed today under advisement," he mumbled. There were no formal referrals. There were no promises of sweeping investigations or subsequent hearings. There were no official actions taken whatsoever. It was simply a rapid adjournment, functioning as the awkward institutional equivalent of a burning building being hurriedly evacuated without anyone having the courage to pull the fire alarm. The Democratic members of the committee fled the dais in the exact manner they always did when a highly publicized event went catastrophically wrong. Individually, quietly, and wearing carefully composed facial expressions, aggressively suggesting they possessed somewhere vastly more important to be. Out in the hallway, Newsom's vast campaign apparatus was already in full retreat. Through the heavy open doors of the chamber, several lingering committee members could clearly observe the staff engaging in an activity that political operatives must absolutely never be seen doing on the day of a highly touted public launch. Frantically packing up their boxes, Newsom slowly stood up from the witness table. He meticulously straightened his expensive jacket, attempting to smooth out the agonizing crease. Notably, he did not reach up to touch his perfect hair again. He had learned, through brutal conditioning over the preceding 90 minutes, that deploying that specific, comforting gesture ultimately cost him significantly more political capital than it gained. He began his walk toward the exit. He adopted the measured, deliberate stride of a politician, furiously determined to leave the room looking exactly like the powerful man who had entered it. Yet everyone present in the room, including, most painfully and intimately, Newsom himself, was acutely aware that the confident man who had walked in no longer existed. At the door, Newsom paused. He did not stop to deliver a witty, defiant final line. His mental reservoir was entirely empty. He paused because physically exiting a room where you have just been systematically, publicly disassembled requires a brief moment of intense internal recalibration. It demands a rapid, silent negotiation between the powerful person you believed you were and the heavily damaged person you have suddenly become. He walked out, disappearing into the hallway. Trump, naturally, stayed behind. Trump invariably stayed. In Donald Trump's worldview, willingly leaving a room where you have just secured a massive, dominant victory is fundamentally synonymous with walking away and leaving massive piles of money sitting on the table. He immediately commanded the floor, holding an impromptu press conference and taking shouted questions from the bewildered reporters for an entirely unscripted 12 minutes. He didn't stand behind a formal podium. He stood directly amidst the heavy wooden desks of the hearing room, entirely surrounded by flashing cameras, happily conducting what essentially amounted to a miniature, high-energy campaign rally right in the center of a prestigious congressional chamber. "Was that necessary, Mr. President?" a reporter shouted over the din. "Was what necessary?" "The truth," Trump fired back, entirely unrepentant. "Yeah, the truth is always necessary. Not always popular, but always necessary." "Do you think Governor Newsom will still run for president?" another voice called out. "I hope he does. I really do," Trump grinned widely. "French Laundry Gavin running for president would be the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. And people have given me a lot of gifts. Tremendous gifts." "What about the Kimberly Guilfoyle comment?" a journalist pressed. "Was that too personal?" Trump paused. It was a rare, genuine moment of reflection, entirely distinct from his theatrical performance pauses. "Maybe," he conceded slowly. "Yeah, maybe that was a lot. But it was true. And I always go with true, even when it's a lot. Especially when it's a lot. When he finally departed, he did not slip out quietly through an obscure side door. He marched directly out through the grand main entrance, signing autographs for eager bystanders along the way, enthusiastically shaking hands with the stunned Capitol police officers, and happily posing for a photograph with a building janitor who had asked. This was classic Trump in his element. The entire building had transformed into his personal stage, and he absolutely refused to exit a stage without maximum fanfare. Simultaneously, the vast machinery of the internet was moving at its customary blistering speed. In the specific case of Donald Trump, this meant information was traveling faster than the speed of sound, and approximately twice the speed of light. The newly minted moniker, French Laundry Gavin, violently seized the #1 trending position globally across all major platforms, and remarkably held it for an unprecedented 41 continuous hours. It was the longest sustained trending period for any Trump-coined nickname since Crooked Hillary dominated the digital landscape back in 2016. The brutal diagnosis, beautiful disaster, securely occupied the #2 spot, and the devastating hashtag "Your ex-wife chose Trump," a phrase that reportedly caused members of Newsom's communications team to become physically ill peaked at #3. However, the specific piece of media that traveled the furthest and penetrated deepest into the culture was not the horrifying photographs of the homeless encampments, nor the blistering takedown regarding the French Laundry hypocrisy, nor even the shocking revelation about Kimberly Guilfoyle's smile. It was the hair touch. It was just 7 fleeting seconds of high-definition video footage. Gavin Newsom blindly reaching up and nervously running his fingers through his structurally perfect hair. This microscopic, involuntary physical tell of a deeply arrogant man, whose armor had spectacularly failed him, was viewed a staggering 68 million times within the first 24 hours. It was instantly memed, viciously auto-tuned, and set to dramatic background music. A highly opportunistic songwriter based in Nashville rapidly composed a novelty country song titled "He Touched His Hair," which remarkably shot up to the #4 position on the iTunes charts within a single week. The political fallout was immediate and absolute. That evening, Rosa Callahan, the ruined Yountville restaurant owner, gave a heartbreaking interview summarizing the ultimate hypocrisy. A mere 3 miles and $350 separated Newsom's lavish dinner from her forced bankruptcy. By 9:15 p.m., Newsom's Presidential Exploratory Committee officially suspended all operations. A major Democratic donor brutally confessed that while the French laundry scandal was survivable, the viral clip of Newsom nervously touching his hair was a fatal display of weakness that permanently destroyed his campaign. Online, the internet swiftly buried whatever remained of Newsom's political aspirations. Former California resident Mike Driscoll posted a viral photo of his construction crew in Idaho, highlighting that he could build affordable homes there for half the cost, heavily fueling the California Exodus movement. The final silent blow came from Kimberly Guilfoyle, who simply posted a smiling emoji. It rapidly amassed over 11 million likes, proving to the world that she didn't need to utter a single word to deliver the ultimate humiliation. While Newsom's career burned, Donald Trump was completely in his element at a dusty, loud construction site just blocks away from the White House. Strolling through the massive steel beams without a hard hat, he happily chatted with the crew, who recognized him not just as a former president, but as a fellow builder. When a trailing reporter asked why he was there, Trump gestured to the rising structure, declaring that true leadership is about building something real, not relying on empty press conferences, $350 dinners, and hair gel. Reflecting on the hearing, Trump admitted the comment about Newsom's ex-wife might have been harsh, but he insisted it was the absolute truth. He explained that his anger toward the governor wasn't political, but rather the deep, visceral frustration of a builder watching a man take the most beautiful state in America and completely vandalize it through sheer incompetence. Ultimately, Trump proved that true leadership is defined entirely by what you leave behind. Gavin Newsom, permanently exposed as a beautiful disaster, left behind a burning state, a massive deficit, and a trail of broken trust impeccably perfect on the outside, but terrifyingly empty on the inside.